Alright, well, we're here today to try to help you fix your seat on a Chevy. If it's knocking back and forth, it feels like every time you step on the gas it goes back 1/4 of an inch and clunks, and then you stop and it goes forward 1/4 of an inch and clunks, and it drives you absolutely nuts. So today we're going to show you how to fix that. And it's really quite easy. I've been online a couple of times here and looked at other people's videos, and they're almost without question always wrong. So we're going to show. We've got one guy that says you have to grind down bolts. We got another guy that says you have to grind off some detents in the rails. You don't have to do any of that. This is a pretty simple job. So we'll show you how it starts out. First, you just put your electric seat all the way back, and this happens to be a what are we working on here? Since it's Dave's truck,
2003 Chevy Avalanche.
Chevy Avalanche, okay. But you know, this happens in a lot of the different Chevy trucks that have power seats, and I've got the fix for this. I've got the parts for this, and I'm gonna put them on eBay, and we'll show you where to find that with this video, and a complete list of all the vehicles that this part fits. Okay, so we start out. There happens to be a bolt. Put the seat all the way back, and there's a bolt down in the track right there, and that's called a Torx head bolt. And it's great if you have some Torx sockets, and that's spelled T-O-R-X. But if you don't have a Torx socket, you can use a 15mm metric socket. That fits it as well. So we're going to just put that on there, and we're going to take this bolt out so you can stop it. Okay, we took the nut off of this side right here. We took this nut out. Once you get it loose, you have to reach in there with a pair of long nose and pull the nut out. On the other side, we have this little plastic cover, and sometimes it's underneath a little bit of the carpeting. So if you put a screwdriver underneath it, you can pop it off. And there's the other bolt, and we're going to remove that with the same 15mm socket. Okay. You got that rolling? Mm-hmm. Oh, I was going to say, yeah, I'm only using a long extension here. It just seems to be easier for me. But you know, you don't need a long extension like this. You can use a little shorty, a little 3-inch. This happens to be advantageous just because it's what they call a wobble extension. You don't have to be straight in. You can see that it's got a little special end on it, and it lets the socket wobble a little bit. Kind of helps you for things that aren't right in line and you can't quite get a ratchet directly to it. Anyway, there's the second nut. Okay, so now we're going to move the seat forward all the way so we can get at the bolts at the back. Now, in some of these other videos you've probably seen, the guy says, oh, you have to take off this side trim and a whole bunch of other stuff. You don't have to do that. All you want to do is get the seat out in one piece. So don't take off any of the plastic side trim. Leave it all there. Okay, so now we can get at these bolts in the back, and they take a different size socket. So okay, so in the back bolts, you can either use a 11mm metric socket, or if you happen to have a Torx, that's what the Torx look like. You can see they're a little bit different than a regular socket. So if you happen to have the Torx sockets like I do, it would be a number E16 Torx socket. And since I have a torque socket, I'm going to use it. Well, that one's on there. And as you can imagine, these things are on there pretty good. You don't want the seat coming loose in an accident. So remember when you put them back in to tighten them up good and tight. Yeah, when you put this thing back together, it would probably be a wise thing to reference the manufacturer's torque specification so that you can torque these things to the manufacturer's requirements.
Okay, hang on. There we go.
As you notice, this is a bolt in the back. In the front we had nuts on a stud that stuck up through the floor. In the back we have bolts. And as you can see on this bolt, looks like we had some thread locking material on there. So like I said, it would be a wise thing to go into online and find out what thread locking compound they used and the torque that they should be torqued to.
Okay.
All right, so now if you power the seat back forward, you can kind of get in here to work a little bit easier. And you need to take on this other side here, you just need to take off this plastic cover here. Once you've got that off, you have access to these bolts, the other bolt on the other side. So we just take this one off. Okay, we're there. And then this is just a guide pin to get the seat down on, and it helps for a little bit of shear strength on the seat. So I'm an engineer, so this is the way we put a seat in to make sure that it doesn't slide. And it helps when they install it at the factory, it helps them position the seat. So we have to take off this little retainer clip, and then we can get this little retainer clip right here that pops off, and now we'll be able to lift the seat off. Okay, now one thing we need to point out to you right now, because it'll be kind of critical further on down the line, these rails that your seat sits on and goes back and forth in are not the same. In some instances may not be the same length, and as you can see here, this one sticks out further than the one on the right side of the seat. So if you were to just make a rough measurement, you'd say that okay, this one's roughly 4.5 inches, and this one is, let's see here, this one is more like 5 1/4 or 5 inches. Okay, it's not a lot, but what happens is that when you put this thing back together, most people think that it should be equidistant, and you put it together like that and you'll find out that it's not going to work for you. So at this point in time, just understand that these tracks are two different lengths. Okay, and we'll show you what to do with that later on in the video. Okay, all I did to take this retainer clip off is just put a pair of pliers under it, and it pops right off, and there it is. Okay, so now the seat, as you can see, is loose, but it does have a bunch of wires right here connected, and what we're going to have to do is we're going to show you how to disconnect these. They are all connectors. I believe that just pops off there, so you can see the connectors. You'll be able to look at your particular seat and know what you have to disconnect. You might want to just get your cell phone out and take a picture of it so that you know what connector went where. That's what we always do. Cell phones are pretty handy for that, okay? So now we're going to move on to removing the seat.
All right, go ahead.
This happens to be, what, a 2001?
I think it's a 2003.
2003 Avalanche, but like on a Chevy Silverado truck, 1999, this particular set of connectors was in the front of the seat, so you'd have to go around to the front of the seat to disconnect it. But what we're going to do here, they have a little lock on them, okay? And here it is. This is the pin that was in the lock, and we just pull the little pin out, and you raise up this portion of the connector, and then you can just grab the connector and disconnect it. Okay?
Okay.
Now on the second connector, as you can see it's got a little tab right here, a little bar to push on, and if you push that down and pull on the connector, and sometimes, you know, they've been in there for a while, they're not easy to pull apart. That one will, oh, I thought it came off. It's there. Okay, we got that one off. So now we're all disconnected.
Can you show them that lever on that plastic clip?
Okay, yeah, here's the little lever that you push down to unclip it. Okay, once you got these connectors disconnected, you can see you can just raise the seat up and it's free and clear, and we're going to be able to take the seat out. Now what we're going to try to do for you is when you do this job, there's obviously some optimum places to have the seat located before you take it out, and it helps you to get to some bolts. And it's a little difficult to show you how to do that, but we're gonna try at least and show you what we mean. This once we get it out, we may not be able to get to the bolt, and so maybe the seat should have been back an inch, or maybe it should have been back 2 inches. In any case, what you might have to do is put the seat back in, hook up the connector momentarily, move the seat electrically, get it in the spot that it needs to be, then pull the connectors again and take the seat out. So that's the only kind of a real pain in this job, is just having the seat located where you need it to get at the bolts once it's out. Okay? Okay, so I've got my son Brent. He's got the strong back and the weak mind. I'm going to let him take the seat out. They're not the lightest thing in the world, so you might want to get a hand with it, but it's kind of tough because there's not a lot of room to get a bunch of people in there. But once you got the seat out, it's pretty simple from here on out. Okay? Thanks, Brent. Okay, what we're gonna point out to you here is how your seat works. Now, everybody thinks when they got a problem with a seat, if your seat isn't working at all, it's probably electrical, and this is the motor that drives the seat forward.
Yeah, we're rolling.
And back. Okay, there's a number of motors in here. You know, some of them operate the back of the seat, and others operate, obviously, the drive mechanism forward and backward. This is the motor for the drive forward and backward, and it's got a drive cable that comes out here into a little gear, and as you can see, this has a little drive cable itself, just like your speedometer cable, okay? And it takes a little bend, and that's why they use a speedometer cable. They have the same off the other end of the motor. They have the same drive system over here, and it turns this cable. And these two screws, you have a right and a left hand screw, so don't get them mixed up. Maybe that's a good reason not to take them out all at the same time. Just do them one at a time. Then you won't get them mixed up. But if you got them both, if you are going to take them both out, then mark them with a marks a lot somewhere so you know which one went where.
Okay.
Okay, these motors here, this drives the seat back, you know, the back of the seat back and forth. You're not going to do anything with that. You know, don't give it a second thought unless you see something terribly wrong. But And then this one controls, you know, the lumbar and all that kind of stuff. So the only system that we're concerned with is this drive screw that goes the length of this drive rail here. Okay, now there's been a couple other videos and the guy says, oh, there's a dimple down here that you got to grind off, and then there's flat headed screws down here that you have to pull out and replace, and have to grind some other screws to put it back in. That's all baloney. You don't have to do any of that. This is a pretty simple job, so don't turn it into anything more than a simple job.
Okay.
Okay. Next thing you want to do is, when you've got the seat out, put a piece of cardboard down so you know you don't tear your upholstery or get it all dirty. And then what we're going to do here is we're going to work on this one first. And these are the only two bolts that you got to take out. Now, you know, you'll see these down here. You don't have to do anything with this. You don't have to do anything with this. These are the only two bolts that you're going to take out. And what's going to happen is once we take these two bolts out, this drive screw is going to drop out. And what's going to happen is it's got a little square drive, and it fits in right here onto this cable. So because it's a square hole, when you put it back in, you might have to turn that screw a little bit with a little pair of pliers until it lines up and slides on to the drive shaft here. Okay, so we're going to just turn this. It's easier to work on this thing on its side, so we're just going to turn it on its side. Okay. All right, now you notice that again these are Torx head bolts. I happen to have Torx head sockets, but I'm going to go ahead and give you guys the metric size. That'll probably work for you. So let's see, the metric size. Okay, the metric size is a 8mm. Okay, so that's what you're going to need there. It's an 8mm metric socket. For those of you who have the Torx sockets, it's going to be, if I ever get it out of here, it's a E10 Torx. Okay?
Got it? Okay.
All right, so we're just going to take these two bolts out. And you know, these may have some, I believe that these also had a little Loctite on them as well. And so when you put them back in, yeah, it'd behoove you to put a little Loctite on them, because what you don't want to have to do is take your seat out and everything just because you didn't put a little Loctite on these things and they came loose, okay? All right, so now that's loose. And what this is, what we've just unbolted, is this railing from the drive nut. Okay, there's a nut on that screw that we showed you here, and this is it, and it's inside the track there, and that's the part of your seat that wears out. So now all we got to do is push this drive screw back out the back side here, and sometimes it's a little tricky. That's where we were telling you earlier that where this rail is positioned will help you get that little drive screw out. Now the drive screw is about this long. So again, if you find that you're not able to get that drive screw out, and what we'll try to do here is we'll take a measurement and we'll try to give you an approximate measurement that you can set the seat at, and they should all be, I would think, pretty similar. So we'll try to give you an optimum measurement to where to set your seat before you take it out, and then it'll go pretty easy from there. We took these two bolts out of here, which unbolted the block from this bottom rail here. Now this is where we were telling you it's kind of crucial to have this in a particular area when you take the seat out, and this is why. This is an access hole right here. And what we're going to do is we're going to move this down. Once you've pulled these bolts out, you move this down, and what that does is it gives you access to a bolt head right here. Well, as you can see, we're not quite in line with it. And if you're not in line with it, you can't get a wrench in there or anything else. And so that's why this seat needs to be, when you pull it out, it needs to be at a certain position so that you can kind of move this around and get to that bolt. Now, if we had just positioned this seat back another inch before we took it out, then we would have been able to move this, you know, around to where we could get access to that bolt. So what we're going to do is we're going to try to help you out here. We're going to put this together, and since we don't know, we're hoping that all these seats are fairly similar as far as these tracks go. But we're going to put these bolts back in. We're going to take the seat, we're going to put it in the car again. We're going to electrically move it, and we're going to move it forward, and we're going to take a measurement, and I'll give you that measurement, and it should help you when you take yours out. You won't have to put it in and out again to take another to be able to adjust this thing. So we'll show you what we're going to do. We're just going to put the seat back in momentarily. We're going to run it forward, and then we're going to pull it back out, and then we should be able to pull these bolts out, shift this back and forth until we can align this with the bolt that we need to get out. Okay, go for it. So my son Brent here, he's going to put the seat back in, and you really don't even have to put it back in on all the bolts and things. You just need to get it in the car so you can get the connectors hooked back up again. Okay, so I think that's pretty good, Brent. Okay, so now we're just going to momentarily hook up these connectors again. Hope you can see that. Okay, and Brent's just hooking up those connectors. Okay, and now what we're going to do is we're just going to move this seat forward. Oh, you're going back.
That's the right way.
Oh, it was the right way? I'm sorry. Okay, excuse me. We move the seat back, and now when we pull it back out, we're going to be able to have enough adjustability in that rail to be able to line it up with that bolt that we need to get out. Ready? Mm-hmm. Okay, so now we move that seat, and we're just going to take these bolts out again, and I'll be able to give you a measurement here so that you won't have to do what we just did. Okay, now we can take this thing and we can slide it, and now we can line it up with the bolt that we need to get out. For this bolt, you're going to need an extended socket. This one happens to be a 3/8 American, okay? So to get this bolt out, you're going to need a 15 millimeter wrench on the back side, and there's a nut there, and just like that. And we'll pull that out. That had blue Loctite on it. So that's what you're going to want to go down to your local parts store, get yourself some blue Loctite. And so you don't lose them, put them together. Okay. Now, what that's done is it's freed up the drive screw here. So now we should be able to just push this thing back off of that little drive cable, which is full of dog hair and everything else. This is your chance to clean your seat up too, as well. So, okay, when we pulled this back, we pulled the screw off of the drive cable. Okay, now what you do is you just push this back with your finger and kind of push that forward, and then out the back here is the screw. And as you can see, it just slides right on out. Now, this is what wears out. You've got this nut that's on this screw, and this is a special little nut, and you'll notice it's labeled L, and this is for the it's a left-hand thread, and so you don't want to get the nuts mixed up. So that's why you should do one track at a time. This little piece of rubber here is what ends up wearing out. Now this one has just started to wear out, and we'd already replaced this on the 1999 truck. So and we, at the time we failed to video it. So now we're videoing this one. But what we'll do is we'll take this nut off of this screw. So all you have to do is screw the nut out, and screw the screw out, and then lift the nut out, put the new rubber piece in, put the nut back in, and put the screw back in. Okay? So before we go any further, you'll want to measure this. This will save you a lot of time and trouble. And just measure it from the tip of the screw to the front of the nut here, the front of the housing. And in this case, it's 7 5/8. Okay? So just remember that, write it down, because when you put this all back together again, you're going to want to wind this down to 7 5/8. Then you don't have to play the games that we played the first time around. Okay? So 7 5/8. Now we'll take this thing inside. We'll get it cleaned up. We'll get a new part in it, and put it all back together again. And if you'll notice too that the nut here has a little, it's not flat, it's peaked. So remember that the peak goes up because the bottom of it's flat. And I'll show you what we mean. Okay, that comes out of there like that. Then the nut itself comes out like that, and you can see that it's got a little kind of a peak to it, and where the bottom's flat. Okay, this is the part that wears out. And you can see what happens when this thing wears out. It takes it quite a while, but just to show you what happens when it wears out, your seat starts doing this, back and forth, click, 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 and it drives you absolutely insane after a while. So we're going to clean those parts up a little bit. Here's the new part, and that's going to drop in there like that, and then we just put the nut in there like that and screw it back on. Now if you see that the screw is full of hair and grease and everything else, it does need some grease on it. But it'd be wise to go ahead and clean it all up. And we're going to do that here off camera. One of the things to notice here is that this is rubber, and there's some other kits out there that some guys are selling online, and what they've done is they've just taken a nylon washer and they've shaved the sides on it, and they're telling you just drop these little nylon washers in there and everything will be fine and dandy. I'm an aerospace engineer, and if you stop and think about this, GM could have made these things out of anything they wanted to, but they made them out of rubber, and they made them out of rubber for a reason. And that reason is that when you start to turn these screws, you have what they call breakaway torque, and your motor wants to start up, and it would like to see a little bit of play to get the rotor turning on the motor before it sees a load. Well, when you put those hard nylon washers in there, it doesn't have a chance to get the motor up to speed And what it does is the next thing you're gonna, once you put these hard washers in there, nylon washers, the next failure mode is going to be your motor. So you want to put, you know, the rubber back in, the original part back in. Like I said, there's a reason why GM put it in, and it's because of the breakaway torque factor. So if you want to do it right, then put the rubber back in. Don't put the nylon, hard nylon washers back in. Doesn't give your motor enough time to come up to torque speed to move the seat. So that's that. Okay, as you can see, this is that square drive that we told you about in the end of the shaft. And when you put it back in, it has to go onto this square speedo drive right here, okay? And so you can see that you might have to kind of turn the screw a little bit with a pair of pliers until it finally gets itself seated in there. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead, and you might just want to, you know, take a look and say, oh, okay, I can see that the corner of that is kind of up there, so it should be just about right. Okay, so when you get ready to put the screw back in, make sure that this is facing up and the block is facing down, because this gets bolted up to the top piece and this gets bolted to the bottom piece. So make sure it looks like that when you put it in. And then you just slide it in. And you might have to play around with it a little bit, but it should go in without too much trouble, okay? Like that. Then we push the track back a little bit, and you push you know, you might have to get a little screwdriver or something, and you can see where here's the screw and here's the drive shaft that it has to fit over. So that's where we need to take a little pair of pliers and hold this out. And let me get those pliers. Okay, so you push that thing in, you kind of have to bend the little drive shaft up. You have to put the screw on there and then push it in. And I just grab it and pull it forward like that. And that was the train.